The man I loved thought he could betray me and walk away untouched. But while he enjoyed the meal I cooked with my own hands, I quietly slid divorce papers across the table, and he never saw it coming. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. That night, I plated his favorite meal, lasagna, bubbling with layers of rich sauce and cheese, garlic bread crisp and golden at the edges, and a glass of red wine poured just the way he liked it. To him, it must have looked like an evening crafted out of love, a wife pampering her husband after a long day. But the truth was darker, sharper, and far more deliberate. As I laid the dishes on the table, my hands were steady, my face composed, but inside my heart was thundering with a cold certainty. In my purse, tucked neatly into a plain envelope, lay the divorce papers, signed, final, irrevocable. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, feeding him the comfort of familiarity while preparing to cut him off from everything he thought he controlled. He walked in that evening with his usual arrogance, loosening his tie and dropping his jacket across the chair, not even bothering to hang it properly. His cologne drifted across the room, the same scent I had once adored, but now it made my stomach tighten. He barely glanced at me before muttering, "Smells good." His voice carried the casual entitlement of a man who assumed I existed only to serve him. I forced a smile, a soft hum of acknowledgement, and gestured for him to sit. He didn't notice the tightness around my eyes, the way I avoided his gaze for a second too long. Why would he? In his mind, I was still the same dutiful wife who would always be there, waiting with dinner, waiting with patience, waiting with forgiveness. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the script of our marriage had been flipped. Tonight wasn't about love or service or even reconciliation. Tonight was about the calm before a storm I had crafted with precision. As I set the final dish on the table, I caught myself staring at him longer than usual. I studied the lines of his face, the smug curve of his smile as he reached for the wine glass. There was a time when that smile would have melted me, when his presence at the table meant warmth and comfort. But now, it felt like staring at a stranger who had worn a mask for years, and I was only just seeing the man behind it. I remember inhaling slowly, the scent of garlic and tomatoes filling the kitchen, grounding me. The contrast was almost poetic. Here I was, creating a meal that symbolized home and care, while concealing the documents that would dismantle the very foundation of our home. The thought made me almost laugh, but instead, I pressed my lips together and tucked the sound back down into my chest. "Lasagna again?" he said casually, sparing the first bite. He chewed, nodded approvingly, and then added, "You finally got it right this time." That single sentence might have stung me months ago, back when I still cared about his approval. Now, it only confirmed what I already knew. His words were little daggers, small reminders that no matter what I did, he would find a way to belittle it. But tonight, I didn't flinch. Tonight, his words slid right past me like water off glass. Because while he was focused on savoring his dinner, I was focused on savoring the justice that was about to come. As he reached for the bread, I rested my hand lightly on the purse at my side, feeling the sharp corners of the envelope pressing back through the leather. That small touch steadied me. Those papers weren't just ink and signatures. They were my freedom, my proof that I wasn't powerless. Looking across the table at him, oblivious in his comfort, I thought, "Eat well, enjoy this meal. You'll never taste anything like it again under my roof." What he didn't know, what he couldn't even dream, was that the walls he thought he had built around me were already crumbling. Tonight wasn't his night. Tonight was mine. As I sat there watching him eat, my mind couldn't help but drift backward. To the time before all of this. To the years when I still believed in us. When I still believed in him. I was in my early 30s when we married. I wasn't naive. At least I didn't think I was. I had built a career I was proud of. I had friends who adored me. And I had always imagined marriage as a partnership. To people walking side by side, carrying life's burdens together. When I met him, he swept me off my feet in the most dazzling way. He was handsome in that polished, effortless manner that draws people in. Broad-shouldered, confident. The kind of man who could walk into any room and command it without saying much at all. I can still remember the first time I saw him across a cafe, leaning back in his chair as though he owned the space. And maybe that should have been my first warning sign. He always needed to own the space. But back then, that confidence looked like strength to me. His charm seemed like warmth. His occasional arrogance felt like ambition. I mistook the red flags for passion. Our early years together were filled with moments that felt picture perfect. He took me on surprise trips, showered me with flowers, and made me feel like I was the most important woman in the world. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, I realize he didn't actually make me feel important. He made me feel chosen. And that's not the same thing. He thrived on the idea that I should be grateful for his attention, as if his love was some kind of rare gift I had to earn over and over again. I remember friends whispering that he seemed a little too polished, or that he always needed to be right. I brushed it off, told them they just didn't understand him, but they had seen something I refused to. His sense of superiority wasn't just confidence. It was entitlement. At first, his entitlement showed up in small ways. He always chose the restaurant. He always picked the movie. He always decided which vacations were worth taking. I told myself I didn't mind. I was easygoing. I could adapt. But little by little, I noticed that my preferences didn't matter. My voice was there, but it wasn't heard. Then came the subtle criticisms, wrapped in half smiles and playful tones. You're really going to wear that? You're so sensitive. You really should learn to cook pasta the way my mom did. Each jab chipped away at me, but at the time, I let them slide. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that it was just part of married life. The truth is, I wanted so badly to hold onto the illusion of the man I had fallen in love with, that I ignored the man he really was. The contrast between us couldn't have been clearer. I was patient, willing to listen, always trying to compromise. He was controlling, dismissive, and thrived on feeling superior. I worked to nurture us. He worked to maintain his throne. I think one of the hardest parts about betrayal isn't the act itself. It's realizing you built a life with someone who was never truly who you believed them to be. It's like living in a house for years, only to discover the foundation was rotting all along. When I look back on our normal world, what strikes me most is how I was cast as the caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who bent so the marriage wouldn't break. I was constantly adjusting myself to make room for his moods, his ambitions, his ego. He, on the other hand, simply took. The warning signs had been there for years. The late nights at the office that turned into business trips. The phone that was always face down on the table. The sudden change in his cologne. The brand new shirts I never saw him wear at home. He was meticulous in covering his tracks. But arrogance is a tricky thing. It makes men sloppy. It makes them think they're untouchable. One night, long before I ever found the damning text, I remember him walking through the door with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed, and when I asked how his day went, he brushed past me with a curt, exhausting, "Don't start with questions right now." It wasn't the words that hurt me, it was the dismissal. The way he moved through our home as though it were just a pit stop. As though I were just another piece of furniture. In those days, I tried to rationalize his behavior. I told myself he was stressed at work, that he was under pressure. That men sometimes just needed space. I excused him over and over again, not realizing that every excuse I made was another brick in the prison I was building around myself. What I didn't understand then, what I see so clearly now, is that this imbalance was never temporary. It was who he was at his core, a man who thrived on control, who saw love not as partnership but as possession. And yet, despite everything, I stayed, because that's what women like me do, isn't it? We stay, we nurture, we hope. We keep telling ourselves that if we just love harder, sacrifice more, endure longer, the person we fell in love with will reemerge. But the truth is, that person was never real. It was a mask, and I had been too willing to believe in it. Looking back on those years, I sometimes wonder how I lasted so long in that normal world. Maybe it was fear of starting over. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the quiet hope that things could still change. But deep down, I think it was because I hadn't yet found the one thing that would finally make me say, enough. And as I sat at that dinner table, watching him eat, watching him bask in his illusion of control, I realized just how far we had traveled from the people we once pretended to be. The devoted wife and the charming husband were long gone. In their place sat a woman with resolve and a man with no idea what storm was about to break over him. The moment that changed everything wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors, no screaming arguments, no shattering plates. It came quietly, almost casually, as if the universe had finally grown tired of my excuses and decided to place the truth directly in my lap. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Nothing remarkable about the day itself. I had come home from work earlier than usual, my arms full of groceries, already planning dinner. He had told me he'd be late at the office, but when I walked through the door, I noticed his briefcase was already sitting by the couch. That small detail made me pause. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. I listened carefully, expecting to hear the shower running or his voice on a call. But the house was quiet. Then I noticed his phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter, screen glowing with a fresh message. Normally, I wouldn't have looked. For years, I respected his privacy, even when my gut whispered that something wasn't right. But that night, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the accumulation of 1,000 tiny dismissals. Or maybe it was fate, whispering, "It's time." I set the grocery bags down and glanced at the phone. The preview of the message lit up the screen, and in one instant, my world tilted on its axis. Can't wait until she's out of the way so we can be together openly. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the counter to steady myself. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a sledgehammer. There was no mistaking them, no way to rationalize them into something innocent. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a confession. I unlocked the phone, and I don't even remember how my fingers managed to stay steady. His password, ironically, was our wedding date, as if that date still meant anything to him. What I found confirmed everything my instincts had been screaming for months. Threads of messages, plans made in hushed tones. Dinners I thought were with clients had been with her. Trips I believed were for work had been getaways. He had spun an entire second life just out of my sight, confident that I would never look too closely. And it wasn't just the affair. It was the way he spoke about me. The way he reduced me to an obstacle, a piece of furniture, something to be out of the way. Reading those words, seeing myself described so coldly, so dismissively, lit a fire inside me that I had never felt before. I sat down at the table, the phone still in my hand, my heart pounding. I scrolled, each message slicing deeper than the last. She teased him about how gullible I must be. He assured her that I was comfortable but clueless. They laughed about my routines, my trust, my faith in him. That was the moment my grief turned to steel. You see, betrayal is not just about the act itself. It's about the mockery that follows. It's about realizing that while you were busy holding a marriage together, the person you loved was busy tearing it apart behind your back and enjoying the performance of it all. I sat there for what felt like hours, the glow of the phone screen reflecting off the tears that silently streamed down my face. My hands were cold, my chest heavy, but my mind was crystal clear. The line had been crossed. There was no going back. When he finally walked through the door that evening, carrying takeout as though he were doing me some great favor, I had already made a silent vow to myself. I would never again play the fool. He didn't notice my red-rimmed eyes, didn't notice the way I forced my smile. He set the bags down, kissed the top of my head like a man coming home to his loyal wife, and I swallowed the bitter taste rising in my throat. That night, as he ate and chatted about some trivial office gossip, I nodded in all the right places. I let him believe everything was fine. But inside, something had shifted forever. I wasn't his silent partner anymore. I wasn't the woman willing to look away. I lay awake long after he fell asleep beside me, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how many lies had been told under that same roof. In that same bed, I studied the shadows on the ceiling, the rise and fall of his chest, and I felt a calm settle over me. Not the calm of resignation, but the calm of decision, because in that moment, I knew this marriage was already over. He just didn't know it yet. The affair wasn't just betrayal, it was liberation, because once you've been called out of the way, once you've seen your love reduced to a joke, there's no more pretending, no more compromises, no more bending. The line had been crossed, and I was done waiting on his terms. From that night forward, everything changed. After that night, when I uncovered the truth in the glow of his phone screen, I saw everything with new eyes. The veil had been lifted, and suddenly the smallest actions of his carried a weight I could no longer ignore. Before, I might have brushed off his late nights as work pressure. I might have believed his sharp comments were just stress. But once you know someone is lying to you, every word, every gesture, every detail becomes evidence. And oh, how the evidence piled up! He grew bolder in his arrogance, almost careless, as though he had grown too comfortable in his deception. He would come home late, muttering vague excuses about meetings that ran long, his shirt faintly smelling of a perfume I didn't own. He would laugh a little too easily at messages that buzzed on his phone, never once offering to share what was so funny. There were nights when he didn't come home at all. At first, he would spin elaborate stories. The client insisted on drinks, or the hotel was closer to the office for the early meeting. But eventually, he stopped even trying. He would stroll through the door the next morning, whistling as though nothing was amiss, daring me with his nonchalance to call him out. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I listened. And I remembered. One evening stands out vividly. He arrived hours late for dinner, the food long gone cold on the table. I had been sitting there in silence, the ticking of the kitchen clock pounding louder with every minute. When he finally walked in, his tie loose, his hair slightly disheveled, he looked at the untouched plates and laughed. "You really waited for me?" He chuckled, as if my patience was something amusing, something foolish. "You shouldn't take things so seriously." I remember the way my hands curled into fists beneath the table, my nails pressing crescents into my palms. The old me might have argued, might have begged for respect, but this version of me, the one armed with the truth, simply smiled tightly and said, "Of course," because I knew every smirk, every dismissive word was another rope he was weaving into the noose of his own undoing. He doubled down not just in his absences, but in the way he treated me. The small criticisms that had once been rare became constant, like a drumbeat of contempt. If I cooked dinner, he would say it was too bland. If I dressed up, he would ask if I was trying too hard. If I suggested we spend time together, he would sigh dramatically, as though my presence was some great burden. And yet, in public, he played the role of the doting husband flawlessly. At dinners with friends, he wrapped an arm around my chair, kissed my temple, and told stories about how lucky he was to have me. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. The warmth disappeared, replaced with sharp edges and cold indifference. It was like living with two different men, the one everyone admired, and the one only I knew. And the cruelest part, he enjoyed the performance. He enjoyed knowing that I was trapped in silence while the world saw him as charming, successful, enviable. But the arrogance that allowed him to juggle two lives also made him sloppy. He left receipts in his pockets from restaurants we had never visited together. He bought new shirts, tailored and stylish, and left the tags in the trash. He guarded his phone like a lifeline, carrying it into the shower, setting it face down on the nightstand. I didn't confront him. Not yet, because every careless mistake was another piece of ammunition for me. I started keeping quiet records, screenshots of messages when I had the chance, photos of receipts, notes of his late nights. At the time, he thought he was untouchable. He thought I was still that wife who accepted, endured, and looked the other way. He didn't notice the way my silence had changed, the way I no longer asked where he was or who he was with. He mistook my calm for weakness. But really, it was preparation. There was one dinner, not long after I discovered the affair, where his arrogance reached new heights. We had invited a couple of his colleagues over, and as the evening wore on, the conversation turned to marriage. One of the men joked about how difficult it was to keep his wife happy. My husband laughed, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Oh, my wife? She doesn't need much. She's easy. She's just happy if I bothered to come home at all." The table erupted in laughter, but I felt something inside me snap. I smiled politely, raised my glass, but inside my blood ran cold. That was the moment I knew the balance had shifted completely. He no longer even respected me enough to pretend in front of others. To him, I wasn't a partner. I was a prop, a placeholder. And yet, even as he mocked me, he had no idea that I already held the key to his downfall. He doubled down, yes, but every insult, every late night, every careless receipt only tightened the web I was spinning around him. And the more he dismissed me, the more power he unknowingly handed me. Because the thing about arrogance is that it blinds you. He thought he was the one playing me, but in truth, he was writing the script of his own ruin. Asterisk, every person has a limit, a threshold where silence no longer feels like strategy, where patience starts to taste like poison. For weeks, I had been collecting evidence, piecing together the puzzle of his deceit. I had been calm, steady, deliberate. But even the strongest dam can crack when too much pressure builds against it. My breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. I had been home all day, nursing a dull headache, when he called to say he'd be late again. His voice was clipped, distracted. I could hear traffic in the background, the hum of voices that didn't sound like colleagues. "Don't wait up," he said. Then the line went dead. I should have expected it by then. But something in his tone, the casual dismissal, lit a fire in me. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the sheer audacity, the way he acted as though my time, my feelings, my very existence were beneath consideration. Hours passed. I sat in the living room, lights dim, listening to the rain patter against the windows. The clock hands dragged themselves toward midnight, each tick louder than the last. And then I heard it, the familiar grind of his car pulling into the driveway. He walked in with the smug ease of a man who believed himself untouchable. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair damp from the rain, and there was that faint trace of perfume again. Not mine, never mine. He tossed his keys onto the counter, kicked off his shoes, and froze when he saw me sitting there in the dark. "Oh," he said, his voice flat, almost irritated. "You're still up, still up." As though I were a child waiting past bedtime. As though the hours I'd spent alone didn't matter. "Yes," I replied evenly. My voice surprised me, calm, steady, but edged with steel. "I wanted to talk," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Can't it wait? I'm exhausted." "No," I said simply. "It can't." Something in my tone made him pause. He squinted at me, suspicion flickering across his face. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't shrinking under his dismissiveness. I was holding his gaze, unflinching. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice sharper now. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped together. "It's about the lies, the late nights, the perfume that doesn't belong to me. It's about her." The color drained from his face. For a fleeting second, panic flashed in his eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by that familiar arrogance. He laughed, short and bitter. "You're imagining things again," he sneered. "Always so dramatic. Do you know how exhausting it is to deal with your paranoia?" The words stung, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a small stack of papers, receipts, screenshots, proof. I laid them one by one on the coffee table between us, each piece of evidence a dagger slicing through his lies. The smirk faltered. His jaw tightened. "I know," I said quietly. "I've known for weeks, and I'm done pretending." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain outside, steady and relentless. He stared at the papers, then at me, and something shifted in his expression. The mask of charm and control cracked. Beneath it, I saw something raw, something ugly. "You've been spying on me," he spat, "going through my things like some desperate, pathetic." "Don't," I cut him off. My voice was sharp now, a blade honed on weeks of silent endurance. "Don't you dare turn this on me. You betrayed me. You lied to me. You stood in our home, in front of our friends, and mocked me. And for what?" "For her." His face twisted. "You don't understand. She makes me feel alive. Do you know what it's like living with someone like you? Always so serious, so suffocating. With her, I can breathe." The words landed like a slap, but even through the sting, I felt an unexpected clarity. For so long, I had wondered what I had done wrong, what flaw in me had driven him away. But in that moment, I realized it wasn't me. It had never been me. His affair wasn't about something I lacked. It was about his emptiness, his weakness, his hunger for validation he hadn't earned. I stood slowly, my hands trembling but my spine straight. Then breathe with her, because as of tonight, you've lost the right to breathe in this house. He blinked, stunned. He hadn't expected that. He thought I would cry, beg, rage. He thought I would cling. Instead, I was letting go. You can't be serious, he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. I am, I whispered, more serious than I've ever been. The silence that followed was suffocating. He stared at me, searching for weakness, for hesitation. But I gave him nothing, only resolve. Finally, he grabbed the papers off the table and crumpled them in his fist. You'll regret this, he muttered, his tone venomous. You think you can survive without me. You're nothing without me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The storm outside seemed to roar louder, as if nature itself was answering for me. That was my breaking point. Not the discovery of the affair, not the insults, not the loneliness. It was that moment, standing in my own living room, looking into the eyes of the man I had once loved, and realizing he no longer held power over me. And once you break, once the dam finally bursts, there's no going back. After that night, something inside me shifted permanently. For weeks, I had felt like I was walking on eggshells, reacting to his lies, dodging his arrogance, suffocating under his betrayal. But after the breaking point, the fear was gone. All that was left was resolve. It's strange, when you've been carrying the weight of a lie for too long, the moment you finally set it down, your whole body feels different. I woke up the next morning, and for the first time in months, I felt clear-headed. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a sharp, focused calm. That's when the idea began to form. I had always been the organizer in our relationship, the planner, the one who kept track of bills, schedules, even his career milestones. He thrived on attention, on showing up polished and prepared, but only because I was the one making sure the details were handled. It was easy for him to forget that, easy to believe he was the center of gravity, and I was just orbiting him. But what he didn't realize was this: his entire life was built on a foundation I had quietly maintained, and without me, that foundation could crack in an instant. The first seed of my plan was financial. I had access to every account, every shared asset, not because I was controlling, but because he never cared to manage those things himself. Too boring, he used to say, tossing bank statements into my hands without a second thought. He had no idea what kind of gift that laziness had handed me. Then came the second seed, the papers. Weeks earlier, when the suspicions first started gnawing at me, I had gone to see a lawyer. Quietly, carefully. I wanted to know my rights, my options. I had walked out of that office with a folder tucked discreetly under my arm. Inside it, the neatly prepared divorce papers. I hadn't signed them then, but I kept them close, like a secret weapon waiting for the right moment. And now, I realized, the time was approaching. But I didn't just want to leave. I wanted justice. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had thrown away. Simply walking out would have given him too much freedom, too much control. He would have spun the story, played the victim, convinced everyone that I had been the unreasonable one. No, that wasn't good enough. If he had chosen betrayal, then I would choose precision. I began to map everything out like a chess game. Quiet moves, deliberate steps. I copied bank statements and tucked them into a locked folder at work. I documented his absences, the receipts I had already collected, even the words he had thrown at me during our confrontation. Everything had a place, a purpose. The third seed of the plan revealed itself one morning when I was tidying the office at home. He had left his laptop open, and though I had no interest in snooping any further, I already had more proof than I needed. I noticed something, an email notification flashing across the screen. It was from his company. Curious, I glanced closer. It was a reminder about his upcoming quarterly review. And that's when it hit me, his image at work was everything to him. His reputation, his charm, the way his superiors saw him as a polished, dependable man. If that mask cracked, even a little, it could derail everything he valued. And he had left a trail of carelessness that could be exposed with the lightest touch. The unique weapon wasn't just the divorce papers. It wasn't just the financial leverage. It was the knowledge that his double life could shatter the pristine facade he had built, and that I held all the proof in my hands. The plan crystallized. I would prepare the perfect evening, his favorite dinner, the one I used to cook when we were newly married and still believed in forever. I would set the table, light the candles, create the illusion of the doting wife he thought he still controlled. And while he basked in the comfort of that illusion, while his guard was down, I would strike. The divorce papers would be waiting, not in anger, not in chaos, but with quiet, devastating precision. I pictured it in my mind, his smug grin fading as he realized the meal wasn't a gesture of love, but the stage for his undoing. The irony was almost too perfect. He would be sitting there, savoring the taste of his favorite dish, never knowing the entire meal was seasoned with betrayal. His betrayal, turned back against him. The thought didn't make me nervous. It made me feel powerful. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting to him. I wasn't the woman left waiting in the dark, listening to the rain, wondering when he would stumble home. No, I was the one writing the ending. From that day forward, every action I took was deliberate. I smiled when he smirked. I nodded when he dismissed me. I played the role he expected me to play, and he never noticed the difference. He didn't see the steel beneath the surface. He didn't notice that my silence had transformed from weakness into strategy. I had my weapon, and soon, he would feel its edge. Asterisk when the day arrived, I woke earlier than usual. There was a quiet, purposeful energy in me that felt nothing like the exhaustion that had shadowed me for months. Instead of anxiety, I felt a steady focus, like a musician before the first note, poised and ready. I moved through the house with practiced calm, as if this were just another ordinary evening of cooking and small talk. The difference was that tonight, every movement had meaning. I went into the kitchen and began as I always had. Olive oil warming in the pan, onions softened until they were translucent, garlic crushed and released into the air in that familiar, homey way. I made the lasagna the way he liked it. The sauce thick, the layers tight, the cheese crisp at the edges. I took care with the garlic bread, brushing the butter in even strokes so each slice would toast in the same golden line. I poured wine into a glass, swirled it, inhaled its scent the way he always did, deliberately savoring the moment he would think he was savoring me. Everything I did was a performance of normalcy. I hummed a song I had sung under my breath for years. I set the table with the good plates, the ones we only used for guests or anniversaries. I lit candles and watched the flames steadily burn, thinking about how small, steady fires can become the light that reveals truth. I was aware of the absurd beauty of it all. Love's rituals, cooking, candles. The way to people remind each other of home turned into the frame for something else entirely. I had made contingency plans. My lawyer had filed preliminary documents the week before, and I had copies of everything in a secure folder saved both at home and at my workplace. I had photocopies of receipts and messages tucked into places he'd never think to look. I had called the bank, asking about joint accounts and how quickly certain transfers could be frozen if necessary. I'd done all the small, tedious things that make up the machinery of a decisive exit. None of it was dramatic. It was all practical, methodical, the kind of work that translates rage into results. When he arrived that evening, he wore his confidence like armor. He shrugged off his coat, tossed the tie over a chair as if my attention was something to be earned by mere presence. He paused in the doorway at the scent of garlic and tomato and smiled that way he smiled. When he wanted me to feel seen, publicly adored, privately disposable. "You did this for me?" he asked, with a tone of amused appreciation. "Yes," I said, and met his gaze evenly. "Go wash your hands. Dinner's ready." He moved through the ritual of eating as if nothing significant had changed, as if the last months were a fog that had lifted for him instead of a storm I had weathered alone. He praised the lasagna, as he always did, exaggerating the pleasure so friends would think him charming. He took big bites, laughed at his own jokes, and I watched him like someone watching a play they already knew the lines to. He was happy. He was comfortable. He was careless. Between bites, he detailed plans for a weekend trip, mentioning names and places where he would meet a client. He rolled his eyes about a colleague and told a story about a promotion that might be coming his way. He spoke of his reputation in the office with a vague pride. Each sentence was another reminder of what he valued: image, success, control, and all the while, the envelope sat beside my plate in the dark leather of my purse. I could feel it like a quiet thrum against my leg. My hands brushed it under the table once to steady myself, and the little edge of paper was a talisman. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would slide it across, the exact moment the mask would fall. I imagined his face, the quick confusion, the proud posture crumbling into something human and raw. When the main course was cleared and the candles had burned down a little, I reached into my purse as casually as I might reach for my phone, and slid the envelope across the table. It made a soft, deliberate sound as it moved over the wood, and he glanced at it with the same lazy curiosity a man might give to a bill. He picked it up, weighed it, tilted it in the light, and still didn't read the words on the front. "Envelope?" he asked, amusement curling back into his tone. "Open it," I said. My voice was still calm. The only tremor was the tiny catch in my throat when I realized this was the moment. The life we had lived would split into a before and after. He smiled at me, puzzled, then slit the flap with his thumb. He drew out the pages and began to skim. At first, there was nothing on his face but mild confusion. Then, as his eyes moved faster, something like recognition creased his brow. I watched the transformation happen in microseconds. Confusion, then anger, then an incredulous sort of fear. "What is this?" he demanded, folding the papers and slamming them back on the table as if to make them disappear by force. He reached for the wine glass as if steadying himself, fingers trembling imperceptibly. When he looked up, his face was pale. For once, the poised man who could oversee conference rooms and close deals looked small, exposed. "I told you I was done pretending," I said. "I told you I was done giving you the courtesy of silence." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back, his body loose with the urge to control. "You'll sign these and regret it," he said, voice loud, dangerous. "You think you can take everything? You'll be alone. You'll be ruined." "The papers are already filed," I told him. "The lawyer has them." I didn't want a messy scene tonight, so I chose to tell you like an adult. My intention was not to humiliate you. I wanted to end this with clarity. His laugh was not a pleasant sound. It was brittle, like cracking ice. Clarity, he spat. You think this is clarity? You think signing some paper makes you a better person? You think you're the victim here? I felt my chest burn, but I let the heat pass without speaking. I had rehearsed the facts, the precise words that would prevent him from wresting the narrative away from me. I didn't want a shouting match. I wanted to deliver the evidence with the certainty of someone who'd already arranged the dominoes. I know about her, I said, quiet now. I know where she is. I know the dinners, the receipts, the messages. I've done the accounting and made copies. I've spoken with a lawyer, and I've taken steps that make reversal difficult. You chose to betray me. You chose to laugh about me with her. There will be consequences. His face contorted with a rage that looked less like outrage and more like panic. He started to pace, the politician turned torpedo trying to find some path back to control. He shouted about image, about friends, about careers. He muttered that I would be the one who would suffer. He accused me of ruining him. I listened. Let him say the things he wanted to say. Because while he raged, his words betrayed his priorities. He was not thinking about apology or repair. He was listing losses. That confirmed what I had long suspected. He loved his reputation more than he had ever loved me. When his voice finally lowered, the silence that settled between us felt heavy and real. He sat back down, defeated in a way I hadn't seen before. For a moment, he looked like a child who had been caught taking candy. He looked lost. You'll never get away with this, he whispered. Not a threat now, but a plea. I reached across the table, and for a second the old reflex to comfort him rose up in me. A memory of simpler days. But I didn't let it. Instead, I placed my hand on the envelope, a steady palm over the papers that had already done the work they needed to do. I'm not trying to get away with anything, I said. I'm taking back what's mine. My dignity. My home, my life. He tried one last time, with charm, with promises, with the old lies dressed up as regret. But his words rang hollow. I had heard them before and seen the pattern. His promises were as easy to make as his excuses. He wanted me to return to the role he'd assigned me, quiet, grateful, complicit. He wanted the world to keep seeing the happy couple he had curated. I looked at him and, because I could, I let a small, sad smile slip across my face. Enjoy your last meal in this house, I said softly, because it won't be your home much longer. He sat there, stunned, the reality of it, the shock of his own undoing, washing over him. The candles flickered. The lasagna sat cooling on the plates. Somewhere in the quiet of our kitchen, something irreversible had been set in motion. I left the table that night not in a hurry, but with a steady step. I collected my purse, my coat, and the small folder of documents I kept as backup. I didn't need to slam doors. I didn't need theatrics. The work had been done with a hand as calm as the one that now closed the front door behind me. As the latch clicked and I stepped into the cool night air, I breathed in as if for the first time. The scent of tomato and garlic clung to me like a memory. The streetlights threw pools of gold on the pavement. For all the planning and quiet rage that had filled the months before, this moment felt quiet and absolute, like flipping a page and seeing a new chapter begin. The dominoes were falling. The plan had been executed. Now, all that remained was to watch how the pieces would land. When I left the house that night, it wasn't with fear or regret. It was with a strange, steady calm. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm has passed. I had executed my plan exactly as I intended, and now it was only a matter of time before the consequences would catch up to him. The confrontation at the dinner table was only the beginning. The real downfall began in the days that followed. The next morning, I went to work as usual, carrying myself with the quiet assurance of someone who no longer needed to pretend. My colleagues noticed the difference immediately. "You look lighter," one of them said, tilting her head curiously. I simply smiled. There was no need to explain. Meanwhile, at home, his world was beginning to crumble. He called me several times that day, but I didn't answer. Each call went straight to voicemail, each message more frantic than the last. At first, he tried anger. "You're making a mistake. Tear those papers up before this goes too far." Then came bargaining. "We can work this out. Let's just forget about it. I'll end things with her." And finally, desperation. "Please, don't do this. You don't know what you're doing to me." But I did know. That was the point. By the third day, the calls stopped. Not because he had accepted it, but because the larger consequences were catching up. His arrogance had always been his blind spot, and now it was working against him. Remember that quarterly review email I'd seen on his laptop? It happened sooner than he thought. When he walked into that meeting, he wasn't the polished man of charm and confidence he had always been. He was distracted, defensive, spiraling. And unfortunately for him, his behavior at home had left a trail of carelessness in the office as well. Missed deadlines, misplaced documents, expense reports that didn't add up. I didn't have to sabotage him. He sabotaged himself. The irony was almost poetic. He had mocked me for being too serious, too focused on details, too structured. Yet it was those very details, the kind I had always quietly managed for him, that became the cracks in his carefully constructed image. And once the cracks appeared, his pride did the rest of the damage. A week later, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that the review had been a disaster. He had tried to charm his way through the questions, but when confronted with evidence of his carelessness, he grew defensive, even hostile. His superiors weren't impressed. In fact, they were concerned, very concerned. And then came the final blow. I had kept meticulous records of his financial recklessness, the dinners, the gifts, the secret transfers from our joint account. My lawyer knew everything. The papers I handed him that night weren't just a demand for divorce. They were a ledger of betrayal, a neat, undeniable account of how he had treated both me and our marriage as disposable. When his lawyer read through them, there was no spinning the story, no way to twist it into my paranoia or my fault. The facts were black and white, and they painted him for exactly what he was: careless, arrogant, unfaithful. That's when the panic set in. He showed up at my office one afternoon, unannounced, his eyes bloodshot, his tie crooked, his charm completely stripped away. He begged me to reconsider, to withdraw the papers. "Think of what this will do to me," he said, his voice breaking. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the smooth, confident man I had married. This wasn't the arrogant husband who had laughed at me, mocked me, told me I was nothing without him. This was a man stripped of his armor, reduced to pleading in a lobby where anyone could see. And that, I realized, was the real downfall. Not the loss of money, not the career damage, not even the exposure of his affair. It was the collapse of his image. The man who lived for appearances, who thrived on control, was now powerless, and everyone could see it. I stood there, calm, collected, the steady version of myself he had underestimated all along. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "This is the bed you made. now lie in it. His face twisted with rage, humiliation, and something else, fear. For once, he had no witty comeback, no smug retort. He turned and walked out, shoulders slumped, head down. That was the moment I knew justice had been served. He hadn't just lost me. He had lost the very thing he valued most. His control, his reputation, his carefully curated facade. And it was all because of his own arrogance, his own betrayal. The downfall was complete. Asterisk in life. Some victories arrive quietly, like a soft tide rolling in. Others crash against the shore, loud and undeniable, leaving no question of their power. The final payoff in my story was the latter, a moment that echoed with the kind of justice you can feel in your bones. It came not long after that desperate scene in my office lobby. By then, the divorce proceedings were underway. The evidence in my possession was making its way through the legal system, and his world was unraveling at a steady pace. Still, part of me wondered if I would ever truly feel the satisfaction of closure. That answer came one brisk morning when I walked into the courthouse. My heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound sharp and deliberate, almost like a drumbeat leading me into battle. I had dressed with purpose that day, not to impress him, but to remind myself of who I had become: steady, dignified, untouchable. He was already there when I entered, sitting beside his lawyer. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in height but in presence. The polished, confident man who once held entire rooms in thrall now seemed ordinary. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were tired, and when his gaze met mine, there was no arrogance left, only the hollow reflection of someone who had lost far more than he ever anticipated. The proceedings were straightforward. My lawyer presented the meticulous records I had kept, the financial withdrawals, the unexplained expenses, the lies laid bare in neat columns of numbers and receipts. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge was unimpressed. The evidence spoke for itself. I didn't have to say much. In fact, I barely spoke at all. Every piece of proof had already been prepared, every detail accounted for. I simply sat there, calm and composed, while the truth dismantled him piece by piece. The final moment came when the judge ruled in my favor. The house, the accounts, the protections I had fought so carefully to secure, all recognized as mine. The betrayal he thought he could bury had not only failed, but it had cost him everything he valued most. He stared at me then, his face pale, his jaw clenched, his hands trembling just slightly on the table. I wondered if he finally understood, not just what he had lost, but who I had always been, the woman he dismissed, underestimated, and betrayed. And that was the sweetest part of it all. Not the assets, not the victory on paper, but the look in his eyes, the realization that I was never the fragile, dependent woman he thought he could manipulate. I was his equal all along, and in the end, I had proven stronger. When the gavel struck and the session ended, I gathered my things and stood tall. He didn't follow me this time. He didn't beg or plead. He simply sat there, shoulders hunched, staring at the ruins of the life he had built on lies. As I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had destroyed him. That was never the point. But because I had reclaimed myself, my dignity, my independence, my future. That was my payoff. That was my justice. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like I had finally set down a weight I had been carrying for far too long. For months, maybe even years, my life had been wrapped in tension, suspicion, betrayal, lies, and strategy. But now, with the final gavel strike, it was over. Truly over. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of quiet and clarity. At first, the silence in my home felt almost eerie. No late-night phone calls whispered in another room. No unexplained business trips. No simmering arguments lurking just beneath the surface of every conversation. Just silence and peace. I would wake up to the sound of birds outside instead of the constant hum of anxiety in my head. Of course, the gossip traveled quickly. Mutual friends, neighbors, even acquaintances we barely spoke to. Everyone seemed to have their version of the story. Some were sympathetic. Others, I'm sure, whispered their judgments. But I learned something important during that time. Peace doesn't come from what others believe about you. It comes from knowing your own truth. And my truth was that I had walked through fire and come out stronger. As for him, his downfall was steady and public. Without access to my accounts and with the weight of his debts pressing down, he had to sell off the car he used to flaunt and move into a modest apartment. Word spread that the woman he had been seeing disappeared once his finances dried up. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very life he gambled everything for evaporated. The moment his lies caught up to him, there were moments when he tried to reach out. Not with apologies. He never seemed capable of that. But with thin attempts at reconciliation or starting over. Each time, I calmly declined. Not out of bitterness, but because I had no interest in returning to a life built on broken trust. His downfall wasn't mine to manage anymore. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I poured my energy into the things I had set aside during our marriage. My work, my friendships, and my own happiness. I started traveling again, visiting places I had always postponed because he didn't have the time.